Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SoulCanvas Podcast. This is your host, Jenifer Madson, and this is a place to be possible. Now, what I mean by that, what's followed me all my life, is this sense that if I kept showing up, if I kept saying yes, at least interesting things would happen. And listen, showing up wasn't always easy, and sometimes it still isn't. Saying yes wasn't always easy, and sometimes still isn't. When I look back on the leaps of faith that I've taken in this life, mostly because someone else I admired and loved had a grand vision for me, or at least one big enough for me to say, sure, let me check it out. When they would say, you should do X or you should investigate Y, at least I would say, okay. And as a result, miraculous, delightful, mind-expanding things have happened for me. I remember doing that as young as probably 8 or 9 years old. I was taking ballet lessons in Naples, Florida, from a couple that had some nice success on Broadway in their time. They were our local royalty, if you will, and they were so magical to me. They had done the Broadway thing in New York City. I didn't really know at that age exactly what that meant, but it seemed very mysterious and big, and I had this sense for myself that I really wanted to perform. Now, I came to dance with some talent, but not a real gift. And that's another theme that plays for me that we'll talk about as we go on this podcast, saying yes, despite the feeling that maybe you're not talented enough or you weren't born with a certain gift. So who are you to take up space in that area? Anyway, going back to 8 or 9 years old, I'm taking dance lessons in Naples, Florida. These teachers of mine have decided to put me together with another student to do a commercial on our local television station for some local business. And this girl and I were doing some sort of pantomime routine. I will never forget that piece of it. And we were on television. I remember thinking how cool that was, just how much I loved participating, how honored I felt to be selected to do that, how unqualified I felt. And I also remember my teacher, George, saying to me after it was done, you know, you're a really good dancer, but you'd be a great actress. That stuck with me. I'm 60, almost 63 years old, and that stuck with me. Now, at the time, I put it aside because I was so intent on being a dancer. And at that time, I thought you had to pick a major, in other words. You had to be one thing. As I got older and started taking more musical theater classes, George and his lovely wife, Doreen, made sure that in my pursuit of a dream to be on Broadway, that I understood that I needed to be a singer, an actor, and a dancer. So I started going to drama class, and it just kept ringing in my head what George had said about checking out acting classes. It was probably one of the first times that I can recall that someone I held in such high esteem held this vision for me greater than anything I could see for myself. And I said, okay. And I went to take some acting classes, and I did very well with that as well. Now, for those of you who know me, my pursuit of being a musical theater dancer, singer, actress was crushed by my use of drugs and alcohol during that time. My addiction started at 13. I got sober when I was 23, and those 10 years almost killed me. Now, we won't go into all of the horrors of that at this time, but we probably will down the road. I will say during those 10 years, the most formative time for my vision of being on Broadway, I couldn't get far with it. I would go to auditions, I would get callbacks, but I would be so wrecked the next day from partying the night before, I couldn't show up for the opportunities that were coming to me. I had all these wonderful people who had great visions for me, but I just couldn't get far enough to give it a chance. After I got sober, one of the first memories I have of letting someone see possibilities for me were the people in my first AA meetings. when I was so sick and so tired and so sad and so lost, I let them see hope until I could. I let them see a literal place for me to sit, to literally take up space so that I could get some peace and get another day of sobriety under my belt. That went on and on many times a week. If I wasn't in a college class, I was in an AA meeting. I have example after example of what's come to my life as a result of saying yes. And those themes will continue to show up in this podcast. And speaking of podcasts, I've had other ideas for podcasts and even launched a couple that never got off the ground because they weren't the conversation I truly wanted to have. It's been in this last year, and even more specifically in the last few months, that I have said enough already to saying yes to other people's needs and wants and their dreams, their visions for themselves, and a big, big, big hell yes to mine and the possibilities for mine. During COVID, I shifted out of executive coaching, which I had been doing for more than 20 years at a very high level out of New York. And I had just gotten to the end of that, and I said yes to me. I started seeing where I was holding myself back. I started painting for my mental health, but soon after that, people approached me to buy my paintings. The last thing I imagined would happen was that, but I allowed it. Because at this stage of my life, I really am fully practiced in the art of allowing you to see more for me than I can for myself. You know what's really held me back, if anything? It's been when I've listened to people who are living a lesser version of life than what I would really aspire to, not judging their choice, by the way, just relative to the life that I really dream of. I made the mistake of listening to their opinions about whether I should go forward and live and be and experience and impact the way I truly dream of. It's held me back in lots of ways until recently. So without knowing what's coming and without knowing how it's all going to work out, I am full bore 100% hell yes to my work in the world as somebody who goes about her artful life in a way that expresses my possibilities and helps you find yours. So how does that happen? Well, first of all, I want you to know that I started painting in earnest 2 years ago. And some people will take that story and say, well, then you must have been so very talented innately that you're able to create artwork that people are paying you for after only starting a few years ago. And that's not true. Actually, I have tons to learn. But what I had was freedom and desire. I found the freedom to do it. The freedom and the desire, and by freedom, I don't necessarily mean the space or the money, because I haven't always had the money to do it, and I have not always had the space to do it either. But when I fell down that rabbit hole of desire with painting 2 years ago at the beginning of 2022, with my whole body and soul and not knowing what was going to happen, I said, yes, this. Not because I was bored. Bored, anxious, discontent is what led me to the box of pastels that sprinkled their magic on me that day. Saying yes to the magic and no to the anxiety that threatened to overtake me is what unleashed the desire. And frankly, my friends, let's go beyond desire. I was obsessed. Now, I like to learn things, so I knew, as obsessed as I was in the beginning, that could have turned out to be one of the myriad of things that I get excited about, go learn, and then don't do much with. I'm not judging that either, but that's a different pattern in my past. I would go learn stained glass, cross-stitch, Norwegian stitching, knitting, you get the point. But this was different. That day, this was all of the color and energy and vibrancy and immediacy that was lacking in my life at the time. And so I said yes to it. And I said yes to it more and more and more and more, and started studying more ways to express myself through paint of different kinds, on different surfaces, with different subjects. And every time in that last 2.5 years that I would try and lock it down to a particular thing or approach or kind of paint, I'd get unhappy and not delighted. But every time I'd go back to saying yes, to just playing, seeing what comes up and delighting in the process, beautiful things would happen. And I know that's true for my life. I know that's true for your life. So why this podcast? Because again, this is a place to be possible. This is a place to talk about what's possible for your life, what's holding you back from it. And if we take all of that away and say yes to those possibilities based on your deep knowledge of who you must be in this world, what you must experience, and how you must impact, let's talk about what happens then. Let's talk about what comes to your life next as a result of that boldness, that bravery. So that's what we're going to do. People from all walks of life, challenged with all sorts of things, sharing their stories, saying yes to what's possible, being possible. I hope you'll join me.